Thank you for choosing the Shami Benny Show. This is episode 22, and I am joined by Ben Van Gelder. He's an award-winning saxophonist from the Netherlands and has played with notable artists such as Aaron Parks, Mark Turner, and Ranier Bess. And you could obviously correct me if I'm pronunciation because I know.
That's pretty decent actually.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. He's currently a faculty member at the Conservatorium van Amsterdam, where he teaches saxophone, creative jazz writing, and master electives. You could check his latest project, Mina, from the Paradise Suite on YouTube. So, Ben, thank you for joining me today. Appreciate you.
No problem. Thank you
Yeah,
for having me.
yeah, man. Yeah, man. So, kind of first question I have for you is your project, your project Mina. It's like your most recent one on your YouTube channel.
Yeah,
Kind of talk to me about like the influence that goes behind that project.
sure. So that is Mina is the name of a piece that is part of a suite called Paradise, which was named after a painting by Marc Chagall. And besides studying music, I also studied art history. And for me, visual art, images, stories, and objects are all often serve as a conceptual framework for the music that I write. So it really helps me to get the creative process going and to relate the music to something in the world. And now this project is fairly abstract. It relates to consciousness or awakening, which is roughly what the painting by Chagall is about. And so all the titles in the suite, they all refer to this idea of consciousness and awakening. So Mina is a bird in a book called Island, and it's a bird that is meant to bring the people on the island to the here and now. So the call of the bird is kind of a reminder of the here and now.
Mm.
And so that song I dedicated to my girlfriend
Mm.
for that reason. But yeah, that whole project was part of a commission by the BIM House, which is one of the bigger venues in the Netherlands.
Mm.
And so they gave me a commission to write a new set of music, basically. And yeah, this is one of those pieces, one of the pieces from the suite.
That's cool. So you said so one of the pieces from the suite. I was
Yeah,
curious because I couldn't find any of the other pieces from the Parody Suite.
yeah. I try
Yeah.
to keep them secret. If
Mm.
you look, there's actually a video online somewhere on YouTube
Of
um,
the whole thing. Oh,
of
I didn't
of
I didn't I didn't check the YouTube
yeah.
channel.
It's not the entire suite.
Okay.
It's maybe 4 or 5 pieces. I think I wrote maybe 8 pieces in total.
Mm.
But it was recorded for a documentary called Next Generation, which is a documentary about the new generation of jazz musicians in the Netherlands. So,
Oh.
and part of the documentary is um, I was invited to play a concert, and they
Mm.
filmed it and recorded it nicely, and then chose excerpts from that concert for the documentary. But that whole concert on its own is also available online. It might be gone now, but it was online for, I don't know, a year or two at least. So that includes some more of the pieces. But
Yeah.
part of the reason why I'm not super public about it yet is because um, yeah, I'd like to record the music first on my own
Mm.
terms and
That makes sense.
spend some more time with it before I release it to the public. Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, that's what I was wondering because I was like, you said it's a suite, but I
Yeah.
was like, I only found one song.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I was like,
Yeah.
wait a second, what's going on?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So you said that this was part of a documentary that highlights or like I guess gives spotlight to jazz musicians in the
Yeah.
Netherlands.
Yeah. It
So
does. Yeah.
I don't know how much is the documentary out yet?
Yeah. Yeah. It's out and it's subtitled. Well, you can select that on YouTube to
Yeah.
include titles. So there are subtitles in English, but it's in Dutch.
Okay. Word. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like can you like walk me through the documentary? That's really interesting because I was gonna like I mean in my mind I was like thinking I have a couple of friends that went to the Netherlands and studied
Hmm.
there as part of like an exchange program at the
Sure.
Conservatorium in Amsterdam, right?
Yeah.
And I like when they all came back, they had nothing but good things to say about
Oh,
the
great.
jazz scene in the Netherlands. So,
Yeah.
can you tell me more about just the scene there and why you think that documentary like is needed to highlight the jazz scene in the Netherlands?
Yeah. So to address your first question, I think
Mm,
the scene for such a small country is really nice.
mm,
And it's fairly big. I mean, it's a tiny country. There's only 15 million people here, or
right.
at this point, 18 million.
Mm,
Um, but because of the conservatory, it kind of functions as a hub for a lot of international musicians and
mm,
visiting artists who come and teach at the school. So because of that, there's a pretty vibrant scene. And then there's the BIM
yeah.
House, which is very important. It's a very important venue, and
Yeah.
most touring artists they play there.
Mm,
So that's a huge asset for the city and for the country and for Europe at large, I think. So
mm,
um, yeah, because of that, it's a pretty good climate for the arts, and yeah, there's a decent amount of support that artists can get if you live here. So that's one of the things that I think makes the Netherlands uh, favorable for
mm,
musicians, because you if you have a plan and you can articulate it well enough, then there's funding to be gotten to execute your plan. So that's pretty sweet, I'd say.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, this documentary series is it's really nice. I see it as something that's uh, I think especially valuable in sometime down the road, when I'm in my 40s or 50s, and then there's this documentary from when I was in my late 20s, which is
Mm,
it's really nice, I think, to see where I was at then. And the way this documentary works is it usually pairs a musician with a mentor,
mm,
an older musician.
yeah.
And in my case, it was my dad actually,
Mm,
who was prominently featured over the phone because it was recorded in COVID times. So
yeah, right.
um, but yeah, I was on the phone with him a bunch, and so you see us two conversing, and
Mm.
that's really nice. So it's nice that they do that. I think it will be a really nice document sometime down the road.
Yeah, for sure. Because your dad owned he still owns a record shop in your hometown, right?
He does, yeah, he does, and he's still going strong. He's been running that record store for about 40 years now. So
Man,
yeah,
that's
special.
cool. How did that I guess like how did that experience kind of shape? Because I know you said your mom's a classical
Yeah,
musician, right?
yeah, yeah.
And because you and your brother both like picked up piano as a young child,
Sure.
what if like what influence did your dad have with you picking up the saxophone at 11?
A huge influence, actually. I mean, the music was always happening around the house,
Mm,
whether it was my mom playing or playing her records. She's more interested in, like, she loves jazz, but she also comes
yeah.
from a classical and folk music background,
Okay.
and she writes her own music too. And then my dad was just playing whatever artist he chose. He'd play all the records of that particular
Yeah.
artist. So
Yeah.
if he was into Frank Sinatra, it was Frank Sinatra all day.
Yeah.
If it was Sonny Rollins, it was Sonny Rollins all day.
Right.
And he kind of played guessing games with us, like these blindfold tests where we had to guess who was playing. It's like, do you
Yeah.
know who the saxophonist is? And I'm like, no, I know it's a
You're
tenor
like,
saxophone, but I don't have no idea who that
yeah,
is. He's like, well,
right.
that's John Coltrane, and you need to be able to tell within a second because it's so recognizable.
Right.
And I was, I don't know, 6 or 7. So he kind of primed me to these sounds at a young age. And he also instilled in me this idea that um, these musicians that we still listen to,
Mm,
the people that we look up to, they had something highly personal present in their music and in their
right.
sound, and that it's as recognizable as a human voice.
Mm,
When you pick up the phone, you if it's somebody who's close to you, you know immediately who it is.
exactly. Yeah.
So I think that was important for me to realize that there's this personal aspect to somebody's sound. And when I switched from saxophone, I wanted to switch to a horn. I didn't know which horn yet, so
Mm,
I told my dad I was thinking about either saxophone or trumpet. And then my dad said, don't pick up the trumpet because it's really hard. You shouldn't do it. And I'm kind of thankful for that because
yeah.
trumpet is really hard. It's
It
very
is.
unforgiving. It's so
I
unforgiving, man.
agree. I agree.
I mean, the saxophone has its issues, but it's
Nothing
definitely,
like the trumpet.
no, my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then I had a neighbor who is a professional saxophonist. So I got my first lesson from him, and then
Okay.
was able to borrow an instrument from him. And that's kind of how it started. Um,
Wow.
yeah, so my dad was very important, introducing me to music and instilling this idea that someone's sound is personal and that you should have your own sound. That's another thing that he told me. He's like, well, if you choose the saxophone, there's a lot of amazing saxophonists.
Uh-huh.
So what are you gonna do to make something personal out of your sound? So that's
Mm.
something that was kind of on my mind from a young age, ever since I
Yeah.
started playing. Yeah.
Yeah. That's dope because like I mean, I remember the very first time I listened to you, I was probably like in high school. I'm a young cat. I'm like 23, you know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
cool. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But like I remember it was like I was probably like in high school when I first listened to you, right? And
Hmm.
funny enough, it was I don't know if you know Bernie Bootlegs on YouTube at all.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, he posted a video playing like a F blues or something like that, right?
Right.
Where you're like completely shredded on it. And I remember just thinking in my head, like, because I was a young high school cat, I was like, oh man, like this is like very different. Like your playing is like very different. And the more
Mm.
acquainted I got with like jazz, the more I realized your sound is like I could like be blindfolded right now, right?
Right.
And if someone like put a gun to my head and is like, who is this player? I'll be like, it's Ben Van Gelder, you know, like
Mm.
because
Yeah.
it's like like I mean automatically like I know how your sound sounds like, and you have such a different sound. So
Oh,
like,
cool.
and I know like you got a lot of inspiration from like Benjamin Herman, right? Am I
Yeah.
correct in that?
Yes.
But like kind of where does your sound concept come from?
Oh man.
Might be a loaded question.
Yeah, well, it's not low. It's just there's a lot of flavors that I really love.
Mm,
People's sounds that I really love and that I've listened to a lot over the years. And there's
mm,
some people that I go back to always, like Charlie Parker, for instance.
okay, yeah,
Um, and yeah, I always wanted my sound to be kind of dark and round and like that, basically. Yeah,
yeah,
dark and round and kind of pure, not too many frills. So I kind of had that in mind. And it's also something that kind of came naturally to me. I didn't think about it
mm,
so much. I mean, I did practice sound. I practiced like being able to play with projection and
yeah,
stuff, and to make the instrument sound equally throughout the registers.
mm,
The saxophone is a very imperfect instrument, so
yeah,
I worked on that, and tuning, and getting each note to sound as balanced as the previous or one or the next one.
mm,
So I did work on that, but sonically, I just always my sound also kind of changed throughout the years. I think it's maybe a little bit brighter now
mm,
than it used to be. But I'm just not too worried about it. It's like it's something I live with, I sit with it, and I've never had like any real issues with it so
mm,
much.
okay,
And yeah, I mean, the sound is informed by all the people that I love. So
yeah,
Benjamin Herman was a huge influence, Dick Oates,
yeah,
um, and then Charlie Parker and Cannonball, and yeah, Ornette Coleman too. Love his sound.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, there's so many great
yeah.
sounds out there.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes sense. I feel like that sound is a very personal thing, and I feel like sometimes
yeah,
when I ask that question to people, they're like, "Dude, I don't even know what you're talking about right now. I just
yeah,
like do my thing." So
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
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 yeah. That makes sense. So speaking of like Dick Oates and like America a little bit, I know you kind of had lessons at the Conservatorium in Amsterdam,
yeah.
like when you were like a teenager, but you went to
Right.
school at the new school in New York, right? When you were 17 years
Correct.
old.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
kind of tell me about like that experience, like being in America full time,
Sure.
and like some positives and negatives that you got from being in America full time
Yeah,
per se.
sure. Yeah, you're well informed. I was 17 when I moved there, so I was a kid still,
Mm,
basically.
yeah.
And I mean, I was fairly independent, but New York is a tough place for
Yeah,
anybody, and
for sure.
especially for a 17-year-old kid. So I was
Yeah.
definitely shocked by some of the things that I saw,
Uh,
and um, yeah, the rawness of that, and yeah, people really suffering. I'd
mm-hmm.
never really seen that before, so
Okay.
that was tough for me. And it was early on that I realized that would never be a place where I could see myself living for the
Okay.
long term
Yeah.
because of that, because of the inequality and the way that people's lives are just so dramatically different. In the
Mm-hmm.
Netherlands, it's much more equal in a way. It's
Yeah.
a more socialist country.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something that kind of that shook me, and
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, I'm really thankful for the experience and all the great music I heard, and in
Right.
particular, you know, people sometimes ask me about my teachers, but I consider my peers, people that I went to school with, my biggest teachers.
Yeah.
Spent so much time with my friends like Craig Weinrib and Peter Schlam and Rick Rosado and
Uh-huh.
Lucas Pino and Glenn Zaleski and all these guys. And also Logan Richardson was around
Wow.
in the first, at least in the first 2 semesters when I was in school.
Yeah.
And Corey King, Bernice Travis, all
Ooh.
these amazing musicians. And
Yeah.
so, I came from a place where I kind of stood out for being young and talented. And then when
Mm-hmm.
I got to New York, that was kind of off the table. It's like, all right, what else?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is that's kind of there's a lot of that. So
Yeah.
for me, I think also because I went back to New York for the first time after since the pandemic in September,
Mm.
and it seemed even more difficult now and even more money driven,
For sure.
which
Yeah.
is not doesn't bode very well with
Mm-hmm.
the arts in general.
I agree. I agree.
Capitalism and arts don't really necessarily go hand in hand. So
Indeed.
it seems like it's tougher in a way, even
Mm-hmm.
more so. It was always tough. And if I
Yeah.
ask people how it was in the 90s, they say it was always tough.
Yeah.
It's always
Right.
always expensive, always difficult to live there.
Mm-hmm.
But still, when I pick up my horn in New York, it doesn't feel like anywhere else. So there's
Mm.
something special about that,
Yeah.
and this resistance that you feel by being in that city. It's a trying place. Like it tests you.
Yeah. No,
There's so
for
many
sure.
obstacles and challenges. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah. It's
So
tough. It's tough.
yeah, it's tough. So, but that breeds a certain, if you want to be there, you kind of have to become resilient or overcome that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I learned being uncomfortable
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
and
For
kind
sure.
of chiseling out something personal, like
Mm-hmm.
a personal artistic space for myself in
Mm-hmm.
that city. There's so many amazing musicians, so I had to think long and hard about what I wanted to do, what I wanted to contribute, what I thought
Yeah.
was important, what my values were, and I carry that with me to this day.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a huge gift from being in New York,
Yeah.
because if you're not doing that, then why be there? There are more comfortable places to be than New
Yeah.
York.
Definitely.
So
Definitely.
I think it's really important to have the right motivation to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I definitely say that New York brings out the best musicians. I would say, like
Yeah, I
if you
think
have
so
the
too.
yeah, I think if you have the right mindset and you aren't easily I don't want to say deterred, but like I think
Yeah.
that's the right word, then I
Yeah.
think that you will definitely like I don't want to say thrive, but like I would say that you will learn a lot just being a musician in New York if you're open
Yeah.
minded, you know.
It is a city where people go through great lengths to
Mm-hmm.
make the most of what they have
Yeah.
in store. So
Yeah.
people do the best to manifest the talent that they have in the best way
Mm-hmm.
possible, and that's really impressive. And I think
Yeah.
everybody's doing that. I mean, there's another side to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think New York is also very individualistic,
Yeah. I
and
agree.
yeah, just kind of that. So that's another side of the same coin.
Mm.
But I think it's both things. It's both great and challenging, and something to be aware of and mindful of.
For sure, for sure. And the other thing that I think about a little bit, this is kind of alluding to a next question here, but
Sure.
like I feel like in New York and America in general, quartets, or at least sorry, hornless quartets are kind of a
Mhm.
big thing. Where like piano, bass, and drums are like a really popular like trio
Yeah.
in America, and
Oh.
then and I feel like in Europe I feel like horn, bass, and drums are a really big
Oh
trio.
yeah.
So like kind of like a chordless trio. So
Oh.
could you am I right in saying that in Europe it's more popular to have a chordless trio? With the
I never really made that connection. You might be
mm,
right. You might be very right. I
yeah.
just never thought about it like that. Um, yeah. So
Because
I can't, I don't know if I can speak to that,
no,
honestly.
it's no, I mentioned that because I kind of went into this rabbit hole of listening to a lot of like Dutch saxophonists like Benjamin
Cool.
Herman, for example, and
Yeah,
like
that
other
is
like
fantastic.
European musicians like London-based musicians and whatnot. Like I'm not sure if you know Sean Payne at all.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean a lot of his stuff is like I mean he has some piano in his like recordings and that whatnot,
yeah.
but most of his like stuff is mainly cordless as well. And I was
Man,
thinking,
can I let you in on a little secret?
sure,
You know why I think saxophonists, especially alto saxophonists, choose to play trio sometimes,
why is
or
that?
cordless at least?
Yeah,
Because when you play with a chordal instrument, you notice whether you're in tune or not, and
yeah,
it's sometimes an uncomfortable confrontation. So I
yeah.
think that's part of the reason why. It's
Ah,
just it's a hypothesis, but I think that might be why.
I think you might be right.
Yeah.
Really funny story. I played a gig in Washington D.C. sometime in the summer, and I'm a saxophonist as well. And I remember listening back to the recording, and I was like, dude, I was so out of tune.
Right, right.
I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
so out of tune, and I was like, man, I cannot post this anywhere. I will be clowned.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
no man, I definitely have to work on that
yeah,
for
for sure,
sure.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am in college. I remember or uni. I was working on a Kenny Garrett solo one time,
Mhm.
and then my professor was always like, "Hey, like, so what's one thing you notice about Kenny Garrett's like, like playing overall?" And I never like got it. I was just like, I don't know. Like, he's using a lot of like out like, voice leading and
Yeah,
stuff like that. Like,
sure.
and he was like, "No, bro. Like, his he's out of tune."
Mm.
I'm like, "What?" And then I'm listening more and more. And like now I know that he was out of tune. But back then when I was
Yeah.
like 17, 18, I was like, no, bro, he's killing. What are you talking about?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think some people use it as like Jackie McLean. It
Yeah.
doesn't really bother me with him either.
Yeah.
It's like it's also a bit out of tune, but it's
Mhm.
kind of a nice effect. No,
Right.
it's
For sure.
but and it's like intentional and part of a sound or something
Yeah.
like that.
Right.
So
No, exactly. Like
yeah,
it gives that edge to it, you know?
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So I guess as far as like cordless trios go,
yeah.
since that's kind of your thing, I don't want to say it's kind of your thing, but like I
Sure. I
mean
love it though. Yeah,
yeah,
I
right,
love playing
yeah.
in that context. Yeah.
Right. So like how do you say that it brings out your musical creativity when you play with the cordless trio?
Yeah, I mean, man, I love playing standards in that setting.
Mm,
And I often think, well, there's a couple records that I think about when I think about cordless saxophone trios.
yeah.
And of course, one is Sonny Rollins, A Night
Yeah.
at the Vanguard,
Yep.
that doubles record. That's
Uh-huh.
amazing. And then I listened a lot to Benjamin Herman's
Mm,
Cafe Alto, which was
yeah.
super um, inspiring, especially when it still is, but especially when I was younger, I was listening to that nonstop.
Mm,
And I mean, it forces you to look for ways to keep the music interesting.
for sure.
So just playing, eighth note lines isn't perhaps not going to cut it. So
Yeah.
it forces me to think more about texture,
Mm-hmm.
think about limiting myself purposefully in order to create variation.
Mm,
So it's a different it's kind of thinking compositionally or like an arranger within that setting, because otherwise it gets kind
mm,
of
monotonous.
still, yeah, monotonous
Yeah.
pretty quickly, because a lot of the standards they have similar
Chord
harmonies
structures.
as well,
Yeah.
yeah, chord structure. So that's another thing. It makes me think about repertoire in a really nice way. It's like, well, what
Mm,
could be contrasting to this song, or what are some nice songs in minor, for instance, that work
yeah.
well, or songs with a different kind of beat or a different kind
Yeah.
of clave. Yeah, so that's what I like about it, and it feels very free, and it's a nice challenge to kind of embrace the space as
Yeah.
well.
For sure.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, I totally hear you. I totally hear you on that. Do you feel like um in my personal experience, I feel like whenever I'm playing with the trio, I'm a little bit more creatively intuitive in that sense,
sure.
where I feel like because of the space that you mentioned,
Yeah,
I'm able to I've played ideas that I've never played before. and
Oh, great.
and
Yeah.
I'm just like, okay, this is like I really like the setting. So now let's talk about when adding a piano or guitar, for example, right? Because
Sure.
I know you play with the guitar player a lot right there, right?
Yeah, Rainier.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so how does playing with a duo like that, like you and Rainier, how does that cultivate your musical creativity when just having a chordal player?
Yeah. Yeah, it's I mean, we over the years we started doing this when we were in our early 20s,
Mm,
when we were still both in school,
right.
and it worked well, this duo setting for us, even though we have different interests musically,
Hmm.
kind of worked well together. Um, and ever since then, we just started developing the repertoire that we had, kind of not a limited repertoire, but a select repertoire that we've
Hmm.
been playing for a long time. And those songs changed over time as we played them time and time again.
Right.
So those songs have morphed into something pretty different now, which is nice. um, and with him, like, we're both band leaders of our own projects away
Hmm.
from the duo. The duo is very collaborative, which I
Right.
love. It's like a shared burden,
Shared
like
burden.
musically, but logistically as well.
Right.
Like we each have uh, our end of the deal to keep up. Which is nice.
Right.
Usually, I'm just doing that by myself. Can get pretty
Mm.
lonely at times.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine.
Uh, so yeah, that's a nice aspect of it. And then musically, we both also worked a lot on playing solo. And so
Mm.
when you work on playing solo, similar to playing trio, but even more so,
Hmm.
you have to take responsibility for all the musical parameters. So rhythm, harmony, melody, etc., texture, form,
Facts.
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And so to make that interesting, especially when you're playing solo saxophone,
Mm.
guitar is a bit more geared towards solo performance, I'd say, than saxophone.
Yeah.
But so we both have our strategies when it comes to improvising by ourselves, carrying a piece of music
Mm.
by ourselves, and then when we meet each other as a duo, um, it feels like there's a lot of options basically, and
Yeah.
we're never really worried about what's going to happen. It feels very free. Like, I
Mm.
completely trust him. Whatever happens will happen, and it will be okay.
Yeah.
I always believe that it's going to be okay no matter whatever happens. So that's a
Hmm.
really nice feeling. And then yeah, we both have kind of this intuitive feeling for when repertoire works for us. Like, we've tried some songs where it's like, oh yeah, this is not for this duo.
Yeah.
And then we've tried songs where we were both like, immediately we're like, yeah, this could be something, even when
Mm.
it's like under rehearsed and we're still working on it.
Yeah.
We know kind of when we find this sweet spot where we can both do our thing, whatever
Hmm.
that may mean, where he feels free enough to like figure out a comping arrangement or something. Like,
Yeah.
he has so much to carry in that duo setting.
Uh-huh.
He's responsible for a lot.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it's partly intuitive as well.
Okay. Yeah. Because now you mentioning that kind of makes me want to ask, because you guys have an album together, right?
Yep.
Now totally gonna pronounce this wrong, and I'm sorry.
Try your best,
Actually,
man.
the Mocam and Hi-Fi, did I
Yeah.
say it right?
Mokum. Yeah,
Mocam. Mocam.
it's Yiddish slang for
Slang.
place, safe haven, and
Right.
it's actually comes from Hebrew. But it's a
Mm.
moniker for Amsterdam, like Dutch people say it.
Yeah.
Mokum. Yeah.
And you say that, like, what, like, apparently, like, criminals apparently use this term a lot, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, is that right?
Yeah, it's kind of street talk.
Ah, okay, got you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So fair enough. And I know you guys released this album in 2019. So
Yep.
like kind of like so my question is, one, with what you just mentioned before, with your synergy between each other, right?
Yeah.
How long did it take to record and produce the album? A, and
Yeah.
B, you guys in well, one example would be in aquatics, right? You guys you mentioned that you used a boogie woogie, right, on the
Yeah.
piano, is that right? And then like a really big amplifier, like an enormous
Yeah.
amplifier.
Yeah.
So like when it comes to like choosing instruments, right, for your
Yeah.
musical creativity, like
Sure.
how is that process? Like, what is the process when it comes behind that? You know what I'm saying?
Well, a lot of it is coincidence, basically. So for that last particular thing you mentioned about
Yeah.
the using the old piano and the
Yeah.
amplifier. We just happened to be in a studio space that had a really out of tune grand piano that wasn't played ever. It's more like a prop,
Ah,
basically. It's
okay.
just
Yeah.
sitting there. It
Yeah.
sounded so out of tune. But we noticed that if you blast a chord through the amp and then
Mm-hmm.
turn off the amp, um, and press the pedal down on the piano,
Mm-hmm.
that chord kind of reverberates through the piano strings. It reverberates
Oh.
the strings. That's what you're hearing. You're hearing like a guitar chord that's
Yeah.
being played loudly through the amp.
I was
And we,
wondering what that was.
yeah, we record kind of the sympathetic vibrations of the strings of this super out of tune
Mm.
piano, and it creates this really cool kind of chorusy, spacious effect.
Yeah.
So that was just, by chance that
Mm-hmm.
we found that. And I think, yeah, just being kind of open to the muse, so to say,
Yeah.
keeping an open mind and practicing that, like,
Uh-huh.
and then things might cross your path, and it's the same thing here now that I'm writing at this place.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just kind of like playing really like as a kid, trying out different sounds because the
Yeah.
organ has so many different options.
Right.
And sometimes by accident I find something really nice, something that I didn't
Mm.
really account for beforehand, and that sparks my imagination, and then that becomes kind of a germ of an idea
Right.
that I try and build from. So yeah, maintaining this openness
Uh-huh.
for musical ideas, and being open to finding them anywhere.
Yeah.
I think that's key to me.
Mm. That's like, and like, there's something you said something so like something that I think about a lot, right?
Hmm.
Like as a kid, or as kids in general, I think we can all relate to having that like jovialness and
Yeah,
that just like that joy of doing something that we enjoy, you know?
yeah,
Like for
right,
me, when I started playing saxophone, I didn't think about competitions or oh, I'm gonna be
right,
better than this person. I just thought about I want to learn this song, so I'm gonna learn it,
yeah,
you know?
yeah,
And I had to think of that a lot about that in university because I was
yeah,
like I mean, we can get bogged down by learning music for big band or like whatever ensemble we're in, or trying to get better, or listening to other players and being like, oh man, like I gotta catch up, you know.
yeah,
But like when you're a kid, you don't think about any of that. You just think about I just want to
yeah,
like, you know, I just want to have fun. I want to experiment, you know.
yeah.
So with like with that in mind, I'm wondering how your creative process is like because it sounds like you still hold that same jovialness for composing music and playing in general. Like, so is there like
Mhm.
a structure to your creative process, or is it more spontaneous?
Um, yeah, I think you raise a very important point here, which is that most people they get into music because they love it so much,
Yeah.
and I can tell that's the case for you, and it
Mm-hmm.
was for me. It was just like, I fell madly in love with this music, and I didn't care about anything else. That was my priority, to try
Yeah.
and get as close to that as possible.
Right.
And I wasn't so result oriented as you describe. It's just like, I'm going to learn this solo and I'm going to play along with this record because it feels so nice,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when you start going to school, you think that's a good extension of this love, but in art school, there are some issues with school and
For sure.
art, namely that you're getting judged for what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then oftentimes what happens is that people internalize this judgment. The
Mm-hmm.
judgment about your music becomes judgment about you as a person.
For sure.
And comparing yourself to others is also uh, part of this problem, what I see as
Mm-hmm.
a problem, like thinking, ultimately when you see somebody who's better, then it's tempting to think that you're not good enough.
Yeah.
I'm speaking generally. This is so common, not just in the arts, everywhere, man. People are
Everywhere.
constantly comparing themselves,
Mm-hmm.
especially with Instagram. It's so easy to do. There's
Yeah.
always somebody who seems to be having a better life than you.
Yeah. For sure.
So it's
Yeah.
meant, and
Uh,
there's a strange attraction to that too. So
yeah.
it's not good for people.
I agree.
It just feeds the ego,
Mm-hmm.
basically, because even though it seems humble to think that somebody's better and like putting yourself in their shadow, it's the
Mm-hmm.
ego
Yeah.
that you're feeding. So for me, part of refine finding this joy again, and this kind of looseness had to do with coming to terms with that.
Mm,
And for me, it was key to kind of decouple my sense of self from music, because
mm,
I always thought, well, yeah, I am my music. It's what I do all day.
yeah,
The music I make is who I am, and this is such a common thing we hear. It's like you play you or something like that. But
yeah.
then that creates a problem, because then if you play good, you're good, and if you play bad, then you're
You're
bad.
bad. Yeah,
So that's not sustainable and
I
really not
agree.
fun, man. It makes it so it makes it feel very narrow,
Yeah,
music, even
I
though it's so
agree.
spacious and it's limitless.
Hmm.
So that's something I had to deal with, just to make music more fun and
Yeah,
more yeah, childlike, to connect with my inner child more. And it comes from, I still care about music a lot, but
yeah,
I don't see it as all defining for who I am as a person.
yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I remember in undergrad, all I did was focus on the results of the
Yeah.
music. And kind of similar to you, I came from a very small community where I
Yeah.
was like talented and on all this kind of stuff. And then now I moved to big cities now, right? I
Yeah.
lived in DC for 1 year and now I'm in Philadelphia, which
Right.
I'm sure you've been to Philadelphia before because New York is
Yeah.
very,
I've
yeah,
been, yeah.
yeah. And it's like so cutthroat compared to like that small community that
Sure.
I was in, and it took
Yeah.
me a while to realize like like I know that I'm a competent player, but I
Yeah.
know that I'm not going to be as good as some other people, but I just need to have joy in playing what I play
Yeah.
in order to
Yeah.
like actually enjoy what I'm doing instead of being resentful for my own like my own self for the hard work that I put into it, like
Hmm.
it's definitely a dichotomy between like having fun and being quote unquote good because that can be very like subjective sometimes, so
Yeah.
yeah,
And usually when you let go, and the music becomes much better,
yeah,
when you
I
let go
agree.
of yourself, when you put yourself aside, then yeah, I mean, your best playing moments, I'm sure you can relate to this. The
Mm,
best playing moments are when it feels like you're not thinking anything,
exactly,
you're just in the moment.
exactly,
And
yeah,
so then those thoughts are not there. You're not
yeah.
worried about you. And when you start worrying about you, then the music will usually suffer as a
Nah,
consequence.
I could not even agree more. It's such a it's such a simple thing to just like
Yeah, it's very simple.
yeah, but a lot of people don't understand that it
No, yeah, it
yeah,
takes effort
yeah.
to practice that too.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
No.
So, you mentioned that in an interview that your European audience is a lot larger than your American audience.
Hmm.
So, could you talk about why that might be the case? Like, do you feel like the European
Mm.
audience, like European people in general, just appreciate jazz more? Or do you think there's other factors that play into the fact that your European audience is just larger
Okay.
than American audience?
Yeah, I mean, I've most of my work usually was in Europe
Hmm.
throughout
That makes sense. Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
basically, ever since I started playing.
Yeah.
And I even when I was living in New York, I was still traveling a lot to Europe to play there. And I know
Hmm.
a lot of American musicians who make a living out of playing improvised music
Yeah.
make their money elsewhere,
Yeah.
usually with maybe a few exceptions. There's
Yeah.
just not so much infrastructure in the States for the music that we play, unfortunately,
Yeah. I
even
agree.
though it's such a valuable thing
Hmm.
in my estimation. It's but it's just not, there's no, I don't think there's so much infrastructure for it. And the States is
Mm.
huge, and you
Hmm.
usually have to travel really far in order to get from city to city. And
Yeah.
it just usually doesn't add up.
Okay. So you think that traveling and
Yeah.
I guess like space plays a factor in
Travel,
audience.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. And maybe people who are at a certain level of fame, maybe they have a easier time getting larger audiences in
Okay.
like theater settings or something. But
Yeah.
I'm not there. Maybe I saw Jake Run was playing in States, and
Mm.
like Shy and Ambrose and these kind of people. I don't know what their experience is, honestly, what
Yeah.
it's like then. uh But yeah, I mean, I'd say in Europe there's just an appreciation for the arts in general.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it's small comparatively. The distances are small. You know, it takes
Yeah,
3 hours by train to get from Amsterdam to Paris, for
right.
instance. You know? So
Hmm.
it's just such a short distance.
That makes sense. I think you'll find this interesting because I know you know this person with participating in the Theodorus Monk
Mhm.
competition. But I remember talking to Braxton Cook one time
Sure.
about I think you know who he is, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. He was talking about how he played a concert in America, and like it was a decent size, right? It was a decent, like, I mean, obviously he's Braxton Cook, so he's always like, he's gonna have
Yeah.
a decent size of people in the audience at a concert. But he said he played in I think it was Switzerland that he said he played
Hmm.
in, and his it was sold out,
Right.
and I was like, really? I mean, because like I would think that he played a concert in DC, and I would think it'd be sold out because he's from DC, like DC
Right.
area. But then Switzerland, I'm like, it's crazy that he was sold out in Switzerland. And then it made me think, do people just appreciate the arts more in Europe than they do in America? Because it's crazy that like these none of these people have ever like even like some of them never even heard him before, but like, oh, there's a concert, like let's just go.
Yeah.
And you see Braxton Cook play and stuff like that. So I don't know if you
Yeah.
have any feedback behind that.
I don't know, honestly. I mean, I know that most that people are generally pretty America centered here. You
Yeah.
know, like people love American culture, you know.
Yeah.
So that
Mm,
might be a factor. Uh, I don't know, you know, maybe Braxton just has a fan base in Switzerland for some
mm,
reason. You know,
yeah.
I mean, he's a great musician, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah, that's fair. I just I didn't know if there were any other factors that contribute to your larger audience. And
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
no, it's just yeah.
I
Uh
mean, it makes sense because you're born in Europe, obviously, and
Yeah, and
you
when you
grew up
play
in.
at festivals, for instance,
Yeah,
there's just generally more people
yeah,
there,
yeah,
you know.
yeah,
So, yeah,
yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. But speaking of I guess festivals and competitions and residencies and whatnot. I
hmm,
know you participated in the Jazz Gallery residency in
sure, yeah,
2013, correct? Right? If I'm getting the year
yeah.
right.
It's a long time ago.
Yeah, a long
Yeah,
time, long time ago. So can you kind of talk about that experience? Because I know you
sure,
you produced an album. I think it's like Among Verticals, right?
right,
You
yeah,
produced that album in part with the Jazz Gallery residency. So, and I know you talked also about how like you got your creative inspiration, or
hmm,
like part of your creative process was going to the Jazz Gallery itself, like the museum, and drawing
yeah,
inspiration from that because of your art history background, which,
yeah,
by the way, I think is really cool. Because
yeah.
I feel like I can't like looking at art, I'm gonna have to sit there for at least 2 days and like what I'm saying, like
Okay, yeah, yeah. I
write some
got it.
notes, but like yeah. So can you kind of talk about like that jazz residency experience and how it
Sure,
kind of
yeah,
cultivated into your album Among Verticals?
yeah. I think it was a really important opportunity for me. Thanks to Rio, who was the artistic director of the Jazz Gallery.
Mm,
um yeah, she gave me the opportunity to write a set of music, and it was there were no guidelines for the set. It could be anything I wanted to write. And so that's very I mean, that's in one way it's really nice and free, but in another way that's very is one of the most difficult things. If
I could
somebody just gives
imagine.
you a blank sheet of paper and tells you to write something, it's like,
Yeah.
well, what's it going to be? So it was so those were some of my first steps. I'd been writing music before then,
Hmm.
but were some of my first steps really becoming more conscious about composition and being faced with some habits that weren't working well, and then trying to figure out other habits that would work well for me.
Hmm.
So it became more of a conscious process,
Mm.
writing. And yeah, and it really helped me to have this framework of this painting among verticals, which is a painting of it seems like it's the face of a woman
Yeah.
behind. It's basically a portrait of a woman behind all these colorful streams of color,
Mm.
these stripes, and they obscure her body, and you just see the face.
Mm,
And it was a very powerful image to me. And it's kind of hard, depending on your interpretation, you could think that she's ecstatic or euphoric, and in another interpretation you could say that she's overcome with sadness or something like that. You could see both. I could see
right.
both those aspects in that painting.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that kind of spoke to my experience in New York, which has the tendency to magnify the emotional spectrum. Like the highs are higher and the lows are lower.
Mm-hmm.
So and then this title spoke to me, Among Verticals, which, when you're living in New York, you're literally among verticals.
Yeah.
There's all the skyscrapers. And I also related it to um, people's ambitions, and what we talked about before at the beginning. People striving to get the most out of themselves. People who
Mm-hmm.
are very idealistic come to New York, and you know, I was idealistic myself as well, and so that cultivates a particular kind of energy. But of course, not all dreams can be realized. So there's kind of
I
this
agree.
reality check that a lot of people experience in New York as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a mythology about being in New York. It's like a lot of musicians consider themselves legitimate musicians because they're living in New York,
Yeah.
and then there's a lot of musicians who live in New York, even though it's maybe not the most healthy place for them to be. There might be different places, but there's so much wrapped up in that,
Mm-hmm.
and being there and participating in this ideal, that people sometimes have a hard time letting go. So, and
Mm.
I had to walk that path myself, and so Among Verticals is about that, coming to terms with the reality of New York, in a
Yeah.
way, in a larger sense. And so, yeah, that's basically it. And it was a really nice opportunity to become better at writing and
Yeah.
more skilled, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. I mean, it's a killing album, and I know you had. I mean, there's
Oh,
a
thanks, man.
plethora of musicians that are on the album that I'm like, wait a
Yeah.
second, you know.
Yeah.
But I know, and this might be like a very short answer to this question,
Sure.
but I know one of my favorite players in college was Mark Turner, you know.
Yeah.
And I know you studied with him and got the opportunity to play with him and
Yeah.
even tour with him. So
Yeah.
can you like briefly talk about your experience playing with Mark Turner and studying with him?
Oh man, it was great. I loved it. And he's such a consistent and, yeah, incredible musician. And I listened to him a lot as well in college, and
Mm.
so I was definitely playing his ideas as well, and
Yeah,
being on the road with him for 10 days, like, was good for me because there was Mark Turner, so am I gonna play my Mark Turner stuff next to
yeah.
Mark Turner? I'm probably not. So I had to find something else. I had a similar experience playing with Ambrose,
Oh wow,
uh, where
trumpet
we
player,
were
right? Yeah,
around the road for 10 days, and he would just do something different every night on the same song. So that kind of also inspired me to keep searching, even though an idea might work on one night.
yeah.
That's not necessarily a reason to repeat it the next night, because it's a different night.
Mm,
It's a different
yeah,
venue. Everything's different. You're a different person.
yeah,
Well, not a different person, but
yeah. I know what you mean, though.
yeah.
I think that's a cool
Um,
thing. I think
yeah,
that's
I
a
think so too.
yeah. I think that's the cool thing about music in general. Like especially like I've never like I mean I've been on tour before. I put quotations around that because it's like something that my university set up.
Yeah.
But like being able to play the same tunes and just kind of like bring something different to it is the most exciting thing I think about music, you know? Like you can play the same thing, but sorry, play the same tune, but bring something different to it each night, which I think is
Yeah.
very important. Cause like, I mean, you're right. Every single day we're a different person because of the previous day, you know?
Hmm.
Those experiences from the previous day make you the person you are in the present, you know?
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think I think you're right in saying that because um when you're on tour, if you're playing the same tunes, obviously you're going to bring something different from the previous night because of what you
Yeah.
learned from the previous night, you know?
Hopefully, I mean, that's a particular kind of approach that I like, which Lee Konitz also had.
Mm.
throughout his life.
And you studied with him too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and this kind of radical approach to improvisation and embracing the moment always,
Mm.
which I think is very powerful and beautiful and courageous. So I look for that.
And that's something I can definitely tell from just your playing overall. But
Oh, cool.
another question I had about just like kind of your music
Hmm.
and your overall, like, I guess, like, influences is, do you draw influences from other cultures? Because from like, going back to your project Mina, right? uh,
Hmm.
um, the myna bird is a bird that's traditionally from, like, southern Asia, like
Oh,
India,
yeah. Yeah.
Bangladesh, and that general area of Asia. So, do
Yeah.
you draw influences from other cultures?
Not
Or
not like that. I don't
okay,
think. Yeah. No. That's yeah. No. Not that literally.
okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know Kenny Garrett spent some time in China, and
Right.
like a lot of his influence came from, like, the Asian culture, which we can obviously hear that's very evident in his playing,
Mm.
especially when we're talking about some of his later albums, like 1990s ish to
Sure.
early 2000s and whatnot. So I figured I'd just
Yeah.
ask just in case.
Man, I mean, there's so much beautiful music out there. I mean, yeah. I mean, the answer to that question is also yes. Of course, I'm influenced by other cultures. I'm
Yeah.
not playing Dutch music.
Yeah.
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 So you know, yeah, definitely. I mean, then yes, but not. It's not like, oh, there's a Southeast Asian influence in that song or something like
Yeah.
that.
Okay, that's
No.
fair. That's
Yeah.
fair. Yeah, and I feel like it'd be very pointed if I guess it was very, like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it'd be very obvious. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
fair enough, fair enough. So as far as um like, you have a lot of records out, and you've obviously been mentioned on other records as well. You appeared in
Sure.
other records and whatnot. So when it's your own album slash
Hmm.
record, what is kind of the math you put in to picking the very first song on your album, since you've put out
Yeah.
now, like, what, it's like, what, five, six of
Right.
your own albums?
Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah.
Ooh. Yeah. That's it's I think about it and then I feel what is right.
Yeah.
No, it's usually I try to look for something that's kind of shorter,
Hmm.
a concise statement, not too abstract, something that's inviting. Um, yeah, mostly those things. In something that's inviting, something that's concrete, and something that's not too long. So on the
Mm.
shorter side.
Yeah.
Those are that would be ideal for opening a record, but not necessarily. It's there's no exact science to it as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Yeah, that
But
makes
those are
sense.
some things on the top of my head that I think about when.
Right. So you don't think too much about it. You're just like,
No, no, but those I consider those things though.
okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. How about an ending? Do you think about, like, the ending of an album, or it's the same
Yeah,
process?
yeah, no, definitely. It's what is somebody left with Among Verticals. It was Sam Harris, an interlude by Sam
Yeah.
Harris that I made into a new song, and it has
Uh,
these train tracks, sounds of me walking around in New York, like
yeah.
this field recording, which was yeah, it was personal to me.
Mm,
Sounds of walking around the city, where place I'd walk often, and then him playing this and the sound of the train, of course. I mean, it's yeah, in a way it's been done.
mm,
But it didn't feel too cliche to me. It felt personal enough,
right.
and I think it relates to I think it's kind of universal, like something that people universally associate with New York, the sound of
Mm,
trains.
yeah, definitely.
um so yeah, and on Rainier's, with the duo record with Rainier,
Mm,
we chose kind of this revisited song, Aquatics, which also seemed fitting, just the effects of it.
yeah.
So I don't, yeah, there's some thought that goes into the last song. I'm conscious of what people hear last when they listen to a record,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, for sure. And I only asked the question because I feel like nowadays there's a lot of thought that like, and you could totally correct me if I'm wrong, right?
Sure.
But I definitely feel like um nowadays people really think about how they start an album and how they end the album. It's kind of like an essay, right?
Oh
Like
yeah,
when you're
yeah,
reading an essay, you the first paragraph is very important. It's the intro, and the conclusion is very important as well, right?
sure,
So, or
yeah,
like you can think about it as playing as well. One of my teachers told me growing up was just like the most important thing that people are going to listen to in a performance is the beginning, how you start something, and how you end something. You
yeah,
know, and like the middle, whatever happens, like I mean, if it's really bad, then it's really bad. But overall,
yeah.
like
That's what
like
people are left with. Yeah,
yeah,
the last impression. Yeah,
yeah, exactly,
absolutely.
and the first impression as well.
Yeah,
So I figured I'd ask that question because the first impression of an album I think is very important, and I think the last impression of an album is also very important as well.
I agree.
And I feel like um when listening to a lot of your albums as well, I feel like I've gotten that, like, finishing. Oh, okay, this is
Yeah.
over.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Like, and like at the first very first like record on all your albums, I'm like, all right, like we're about to get into this.
right.
It's about to get crazy. Like just
Yeah.
buckle up. Put your seatbelt on.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I'm glad
yeah,
to hear that.
yeah. So kind of just as the last question, right?
Sure.
So I know you grew up in your hometown, right? And I know you also you studied with Dick Owitz and other prominent jazz musicians in the Netherlands as well, right?
Hmm.
And then your whole like being in New York for a number of years and then coming back and whatnot.
Yeah.
So with all that in mind, you have a good amount of experience being in America and in the Netherlands and
Yeah.
experiencing the jazz culture between both of them and just the
Yeah.
culture in general.
Sure.
So, like, as far as like both, like, I'm sure there's going to be Dutch listeners listening to this as well. As far as the
Hmm.
Dutch listeners and the American listeners, what can you say are some commonalities that would create would make any musician successful in their endeavors to becoming a professional jazz
Hmm.
musician.
Okay. Yeah. Most of the time people ask what's the difference between the scene in the Netherlands, and
Yeah,
I like that you're looking for a commonality.
yeah,
What would people need in order to be successful in any of those places?
correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you've
Well,
lived through both. You know.
yeah, perseverance. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a lot of emphasis on who's good at a young age,
Mm-hmm.
and that's often what gets light in the media and stuff. That's interesting. It's always been like that. Young people are good, they get noticed generally. And
Yeah.
so, but then beyond that, it's like, what are you gonna do after that? I think the to play the long game, to figure out how to do that, I think that's key to being successful anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to live a sustainable life in the arts for your entire life, that's a whole different thing to figure out. And I think it goes back to what we were mentioning before, where you have to keep this joy and this childlike curiosity
Mm-hmm.
to what it is that you're doing. um, if you start losing that, then I think it's time to reconsider and
Yeah.
try and get back to that space.
Yeah.
So that's what I think. Yeah, that's period.
Period. Short and sweet. No, I agree with your answer. I feel like um anywhere persevering and keeping that joy that you had as
Yeah.
a child is very important as far as um being successful in your field. um i I say that because I know um nowadays I feel like it's very glamorous to
Sure.
to find that quick, I guess, like shortcut into
Yeah.
becoming successful. And I think a lot of musicians have fell into that trap of what can I
Yeah.
do to become successful in this field and whatnot. But most of the time, it's just like persevering, or in other terms, being consistent, right, with your
Hmm.
practice and whatnot, and also just making sure you enjoy it in the first place. Because I feel like a lot of people don't realize that they don't enjoy playing music anymore, or
Right,
doing
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
whatever they do, you know. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know if you experienced that being
Yeah,
in Glennsville, New York,
I
but
see it all the time. People
yeah,
blaming the music for how they're feeling, and
yeah,
that's too bad, because music is beautiful, and
yeah,
it's a whole world that you can access, and it's nothing but good,
yeah,
I think. So
yeah.
yeah,
I agree. I agree. So I know you may or may not have an album coming out or a project coming out in May of 2023. But what are some other things you have going on in the next year or two that you want to put out there for the world to hear?
yeah. What I'm working on right now mostly is a project for church organ and four winds. Tenor, trumpet, bass clarinet, alto
Mhm.
saxophone. I play some flute as well, and
Mhm.
voice, and then drums. So it's a pretty adventurous ensemble, and we play in very reverberant spaces
Nice.
because of where the church organs usually
Yeah.
are there in churches. So that's challenging, but I'm having a lot of fun writing music for this project,
Yeah.
and it's something very different for me. And so I'm looking forward to putting that on tape and releasing that. That's probably the first thing I'll release. And then Rainier and I are working on a new duo record, so that's coming out. And then yeah, this song Mina that you mentioned at the beginning, the
Mhm.
parody suite, that's another thing that I potentially want to record later and within the next 2 years or so.
I was gonna say I really hope that does come out
Yeah,
on record soon.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like um do you feel like the records that the music that the projects that you have coming out soon, do you feel like that's coming out in the next year, or do you think it's the next 2 years like your project Mino?
That maybe in 2 years. I think
Okay.
that's like in a way lower on the priority list. So I
Mm,
think first it would be the organ music, then the duo record with Rainier, and then this parodies suite, which includes Mina.
okay.
Yeah,
No, that's cool. That's cool. That's cool.
so
Well,
long term plan.
long term plan. I get it. I really quick funny story. I remember in college, I was like, I'm gonna put out EP because
Yeah,
everyone else is putting out an EP. And then when I started the process of putting out the EP, I was like, oh,
it's work.
this is way more complicated than I thought.
Yeah,
I'm gonna wait because I like the work, yeah, like you said, the work that goes into putting out an EP, just recording in general, recording is a skill,
yeah,
in my
yeah, for
opinion.
sure. I
And
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
and I completely did not realize that. So
No,
yeah, and the fact that you already have, I mean, looking here, you have many albums are already out, and you've been on all the albums as well. So I'm like, kudos to you because
oh man, thank you. I
you're like
appreciate that.
you're 34, right?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I just
Yeah,
turned 34.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, happy belated birthday.
thank you.
Yeah, it's yeah. So kudos to you. But
Thanks, man.
anyways, Ben Van Gelder, plug yourself. Where can people find you?
You can find me on the IG. And well, yeah, I think keep an eye on my website. That's where I post most of my
Mm,
gigs. And if I have any news coming out, I'll post it there and on Instagram for sure. That's what I use most. I hardly ever use Facebook anymore.
no one uses Facebook.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, Instagram and my
Mm.
website, I'd say. You can subscribe to my newsletter as well if you want to stay posted. I
Do you
send
post
something out.
weekly?
No, it's like every 6 months or something. I try
Okay,
to
fair
not
enough.
spam people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So something like that.
Okay, cool. Dope. So
Cool.
website, Instagram,
Yeah.
and you say that's pretty much it?
Yeah.
How about projects? Any projects that people should be checking out?
Projects. Let me think. Well, as part of a project as a sideman by Kit Downs, who's also in my project. He's the
Mm,
organist in my project, but I was part of his ensemble called Dr. Snap, which is a
mm,
large ensemble. It's a 10-piece ensemble. And that was really fun to do.
okay.
So I look, and it's been recorded. It's coming out, so I look forward to hearing the
Nice.
results of that. Yeah,
Nice. Cool. Well,
cool.
listeners, you heard it here first. Check out Ben Van Gelder on his Instagram and his website and the projects that he just mentioned. I'll link in the description whenever they come out, hopefully soon.
Yeah.
But anyways, Ben, thank you so much for coming on. Uh,
Yeah.
I
No
think,
problem.
I think the things we talked about will be very informative to a lot of other people, especially a lot of the American listeners as well, because I mean I know I'm not the only one that listens to you on a consistent basis as well. So
Cool.
I know this will be very informative. But Ben, as a very last question, I know I said that like 10 minutes ago. I apologize, but do you have any advice for anybody that is interested in pursuing jazz as a full-time career, whether or not they live in America or in any other country? Like what advice would you give to for them being
Yeah.
successful in their field?
Well, I think it's useful to deconstruct the myth that you're a successful musician if you do music full time.
Mm,
I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of people end up feeling anxious, because if you're not touring full time, or you don't have it figured out, and you're not a full time musician, then you feel that being a musician or something like that. That's the the conclusion a lot of people draw, and I think it's useful to see music as something that can be supported by something else you do in the world. And
yeah.
I think there's something to say by for doing something to make money and then keeping the music pure and personal, so
Yeah.
that you don't end up finding yourself doing gigs that you don't want to do. So
Yeah.
that would be my advice, like try and figure out a way of living with music, having that in your life
Hmm.
in a way that's sustainable. And for me, it's very much tied to all the things that we talked about, that we've
Hmm.
mentioned a couple times. But
Yeah.
so that, and yeah, it takes hard work, man. But that's the case with most things in life. It just
Yeah.
takes consistent hard work, definitely.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. Well, Ben, thank you so much for joining me on the show. And listeners, obviously, follow Ben on the socials. Look on his website. If you want to purchase his vinyls, he has a couple more vinyls on his Mocam and hi-fi
Yep.
left, right? You still have some
Yeah,
left, right? Okay,
I
cool.
still have some left. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Like purchase them, follow him on the gram, and yeah,